What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Action RPG tutorial series and the third person tutorial series, we are going to be going over player death or character death. So we've gone over health bars and even armor in this series, and being able to deplete it when we hit these little obstacles, which are basically traps. You can think of them as however you like. I implemented them so that we could test taking damage. And you can see that our blue bar above the health bar in the bottom left hand corner now has completely depleted. That is our armor. And then we have our health bar, which is right here. And as we take damage, our health bar depletes, and once we reach 0 health, we are going to die. At this point, we're going to be able to rotate around the character like this, but we won't be able to move or lock on or aim down sights or anything like that. So our character has been defeated, and at this point we can go and respawn them or bring up a continue screen or something like that, but we'll get into that in a different episode. Right now we're just making sure that the character can go to a dead state or a defeated state, and we have no control over the character or what they can actually do other than looking around. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for everything. I am so incredibly grateful. You guys are really awesome, and I really appreciate everything, so thank you so much. And I hope you're enjoying the series. If you'd like to get caught up in the third person and action RPG tutorial series and check out everything we've done to this point, I'll link you to this playlist in the top right corner right here. That playlist is from the initial episode all the way to the current episode, so you can keep checking it to see what's new in the series. Otherwise, if you only care about the player death, you'll want to watch this episode on player health right here in the top right corner. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do is go to our code, and specifically we want to go to our third person tutorial character.h file. So this is my base character, and in the .h file we had health for the player. And that was a float called player health. We're going to use this variable today to determine if the player has been defeated. Basically, once that player health reaches 0, we know that we've been defeated. Simple enough. To make this actually happen, we want to go to where our functions are in the .h file. So for me, they're right here. And wherever you want, I put mine next to take damage. Make a new function called die, or death, or defeat, whatever relates the most to your game and how it's going to be used. You know, not all games have death as the outcome. Sometimes you just lose a match or you're defeated. So it doesn't have to be about dying, but whatever you put in here will work. Just make sure we have a function to perform all the logic related to the character's death or defeat. Now, additionally to this die function, we should check if the character is dead or not. You could have a character state in an enum, such as the movement state enum that we have here. We could add an dead state and then make it so the character cannot do anything if they're in this state. But I like a Boolean approach here because if we are dead, we do have some things that we can still do, such as potentially controlling our menus to say that we should respawn, or in our case, we can still look around the character to look at their corpse and maybe the environment around them, but they can't actually move or interact with the world in any way. So scrolling back down to where my variables are once again, I'm going to go to my Booleans, and I'm going to add a variable called isDead. And simply enough, it determines if the character is dead. I did make it a U property so that we could edit it anywhere or see it in the blueprint with blueprint read write. And I gave it a category of health because we need to be able to see it in the blueprint and access it in the blueprint so that we can make the animation play when this becomes true. So once you've added those two things, the isDead Boolean and the die function, we can go into the third person tutorial character.cpp, scroll down to our constructor right here, and we want to make sure that we default our isDead to be false. That way we start out as not dead, meaning that we are alive. Now let's go down to our take damage function. Now this is the function where we had initially implemented our logic for the health. So we had this log in here to say that we were taking damage for a certain amount of points, and if there was armor on the character, the armor is what was decreased by this damage amount. And then once the armor has run out, we then decrease the player health by that amount as well. If there was no armor in the first place, then we just decrease the player health by the damage amount. Eventually, we were actually checking to see if the player health was less than 0, and if so, we were setting it to 0. This was basically a clamp. We were making sure that it doesn't go below 0, and if it does, we're just setting it back to that value. That way we know we are at the minimum player health possible. Although we should actually update this if statement just one sign. So instead of just saying if we're less than 0, set it equal to 0, if we do a check to see if we're less than or equal to 0, this will improve our logic by a good amount, because if the player happens to end up at exactly 0.00 health, we still want to kill them. They're out of remaining life. They are dead. So it's okay that we're setting player health back to 0.00 in this rare edge case, but we do want to make sure that we're calling die, and we want to die if they're at 0 or less than 0. So we add our new function call in here, and then right below this take damage function, I've added the die function. Void a third person tutorial character, : die. And the only thing we're doing in here is setting is dead to be true. It's incredibly simple. Now, setting this boolean to be true will allow us to play the death animation when we get into the animation blueprint in a few minutes, but this is also how we can restrict all of our additional commands and abilities and interactions from occurring when the character is dead. So after implementing the die function, I recommend going to the top of your CPP, scrolling through all your logic and determining what should not be able to happen when your character is dead, and then making sure that we check against that boolean before performing that action. So for me, I allowed the turn at and the lookup at rate to stay the same, as I still want the player to be able to turn the camera and control the camera while the character is dead as a little bit of a spectator mode after they've died. If you want to disable this, then just add an if check for if is dead in turn at rate and lookup at rate. Otherwise, leave it alone like I have, and then we can scroll down to our move forward function. Now, move forward, we don't want the character to be able to continuously move, whether it be forward, backward. Either way, we don't want them to do that if they're dead. So I have taken the entire function, everything that was in it before, and I've just encompassed it within an if statement. Just if not is dead. So this is an exclamation mark is dead, saying we are not dead. Only if we're not dead do this logic. If we are dead, we don't want to do anything and move forward, so we just leave it alone. Move right is the same way. So if we scroll down to move right, you see that I have the entire function encompassed within this if statement, if not is dead. Basically, we can't move right or left when we're dead either. There should be no movement when we're dead. Scrolling down again, you'll see that we get to the sprint function. Now, you could actually check against this and make sure that if the character is dead, they can't sprint and they can't stop sprinting either. However, technically, the sprint function only works because the movement functions are being called, and the maximum walk speed is changed to work with this. It's not required that you check against if they're dead or not before sprinting, although it also won't hurt anything if you do. So as the logic gets more complicated, you may have some cases where you do want to include this. So by all means, include it if you want. For me right now in the series, it's not going to make a difference whether I check if the character is dead before doing it or not. The character won't be able to sprint if they're dead already because they're not able to move. If you do it to the sprint function, I recommend doing it to the stop sprinting as well. It seems a bit silly when you first look at it because you're like, well, why does it matter if they stop sprinting if they're dead? We don't want them to move anyway. But stop sprinting does do some things like allow the stamina to recharge when we release the button if they were low on stamina and they've stopped. It also resets the walk speed and some other booleans. So if you'd like, and if you're already adding it to the sprint function, I'd recommend adding it to the stop sprinting function as well. Again, it's not really going to change anything right now, but it could in the future. So if you want, you can add this little safeguard now. Taking damage doesn't really need to be stopped because if you go below 0 health, it's just going to set you back to 0. It could call die again if they take damage an additional time, but the boolean isn't going to be reset until they respawn. So really the function die isn't going to do anything else. In this case, they're just going to stay in the same state that they are. But again, like thinking about it from a future standpoint, we could, if we want, check if not is dead because maybe we are tracking like a death counter. And if we are tracking a death counter, we don't want to be able to call the die function if they're already dead. So there's so many cases where you could check this. You could basically check this against all your functions if you want to, but it's just really just not required. Die doesn't need it. Start healing doesn't need it. But heal, we do want to have it in because if we are dead, we don't want to be able to increment our health again. There may be a way for the character to be revived. Say we're in a multiplayer scenario and one character can revive another. Well, then they can heal that character. But that would be separate logic where we know that the character is being revived. Right now, we don't have that sort of system in, and so we don't want to be able to heal the player at all if they're dead. That would add health to their health bar, but they want to actually get up and revive themselves yet. So it would just add to some confusion. So let's just make sure that the character is not dead before healing. I recommend doing the same thing for heal armor as well, because the armor really shouldn't be able to regenerate if the character is dead either. Gain experience, I'm actually going to intentionally not check for it, because say you trade with an enemy. You kill an enemy, but the enemy also kills you. You could still get the experience for it. I mean, your experience doesn't have to be reset. A lot of games, you have your experience and it's going up whenever you kill monsters or complete objectives, and if you die, it doesn't get reset. So if we trade with an opponent, we may still want to be able to gain experience, and we may even want to be able to level up. Even though we've died, doesn't mean that we can't still get that experience that we earned just prior or around the same time as our death. Interact, though, definitely should not be occurring if we're dead. If we're dead, we don't want to be able to interact with anything in the world, including picking up items or pressing buttons. Nothing like that. Zoom in. This is our actual aiming system that we have, where we zoom in a little bit with the camera. Probably don't want to be able to do that when you're dead. You could do it if you want, but I'm just not going to allow it. So I'm going to make sure that we are not dead before zooming in, and because of that, we probably should add it to stop zoom. Might as well be consistent, although this also really is not going to affect anything right now. I know I keep saying it, it's because it could affect things in the future. For now, I'd recommend just checking. If we're going to check it and zoom in, we should check it and stop zoom as well. Now, the attacks are the same way. We definitely should check against them, although really, if the attack is just creating an animation, and the animation is what creates the hitbox, like in this case, it doesn't matter. We can use the attack, it's just that the attack will never come out. But you know what? For consistency and convenience sake in the future, let's just go ahead and add it. If we're not dead, then we can attack. Add to inventory gets called when we interact with objects, so it's not required that we block that because our interact is already blocked. Enable stamina gain is currently only being called through some of those timers that I was showing you earlier with the stop sprinting. So it can't be called now. No real reason to check for is dead at the current time. Same with depleted all stamina. These things will already be blocked if we're dead, so it doesn't really matter. The toggle lock on is important that we make sure we don't do it if we're dead, because we don't want to be able to lock on to opponents if we're defeated. So if not dead, of course, encompass the entire function. Same with changing a lock on target. So once we're already locked on, we don't want to be able to switch between different targets when we're dead. And then here is the tick function, and we don't have to do anything in there. We can still let it tick and go through all this logic. In here, there is one thing I would like to do in the base character BP using our isDead boolean. So if we open up our base character blueprint, this is a child of the class we were just editing. This has our mesh and some other components that we've added to it. In the event graph, we have an input action, open close menu. So if I go to my edit project settings, scroll down to input, you'll see that I have an open close menu input action bound to the 2 key on my keyboard. When I press the 2 key, I open up my inventory. We don't want to be able to open the inventory if we're dead, so I am just going to move all the logic that was in here over a little bit. And I'm going to add the isDead check in here first, so get isDead. Bring that into a branch. And only if it's false do we want to do the rest of the logic in here, because that's saying if we are not dead, then we can open our inventory, or close inventory as well. It works both ways. We will not be able to close the inventory either. Once that is done, let's make sure we go to our animation blueprint for our character and add the death animation. So going into the assassin and a BP, I have a new animation called Assassin Death 1 or A_Death 1. This is just in case we have different death animations. And so here's my death animation that I have added to the game. Off of the idle and move blend space, I've added a state called death. So right click, add state. And again, I called it death right here. It's got no events on it or anything like that. The only transition to it is from idle move to death. There's no transition back currently, but again, if you have a revival system, which is something we'll be going over, then you could, of course, bring it to some other state. And the transition rule for idle to move to death is just basically our Boolean is dead. There are no transition events. It is quite literally character reference, which is the owner of the animation blueprint, the is dead Boolean, and plugging it into the result. So if we're dead, we'll go into this state and we'll just stay there. Of course, this means in the next episode we have to go over respawning or continuing, however you want to think of that. So that's what we'll be covering. One additional thing that you might want to look out for is that if we lock on to our opponent and we are to die while locked on, we will stay locked on because we don't actually disable lock on upon death. You could keep this if you want, because if this is the case in the game, when the AI is moving around after you've died, you will stay locked onto them. That could be something that you want. If you don't want it, I recommend that you go back into your code. And when we die, we don't only set the is dead Boolean to true. We can add some logic above it to check if we are locked on. We can then call toggle lock on, which will cause the lock on to stop. And this is going to disable lock on / targeting when dying. Then we'll set is dead to true after that, because toggle lock on is blocked by the is dead Boolean. So we want to make sure that we call it before we set the Boolean to be true. Now, if we reload, we won't be able to stay locked on after we die. Again, that's up to you if you want that or not. If you don't want that, here's how you fix it. If you do want that, just leave out this if statement and this toggle lock on function call. You don't need to do them. Coming back into the engine now. If we try the same thing with the new changes, we can lock onto our opponent and I can die. And you'll see the lock on is toggled off. I can still look around. Everything's working as intended, but the lock on is no longer there. So that has been disabled. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. And I just really appreciate it. Want to give another thank you to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys again. You are so kind, and I am so very grateful for all the support you give. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out, and it is completely free. But like I said, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.